Hello, this is Mrs. Arnold, and in this video we will talk about weathering. Questions you should be able to answer at the end are: how do mechanical and chemical weathering differ? What are the different factors that affect mechanical and chemical weathering? And what variables affect the rate of weathering? The main idea of this video is that weathering breaks down materials on or near Earth's surface. It is really important to not confuse weathering and erosion. That is one thing that I see happening a lot to students during this unit. So weathering is the breaking down of things, of rocks, and erosion is the carrying away of rocks and broken down material. This picture is on page 162 of your textbook, and the question that your textbook asks and that I'm asking here is: how were the features on the rock formed? And you can see here that we have exfoliation occurring due to the changes in the temperature and pressure that can cause the rocks to crack and split. We have frost wedging happening. We have the tree roots that are causing the cracks in the rock to widen. So these are various things that we are going to discuss today. So what is weathering? Weathering is going to be the process in which materials on or near Earth's surface break down and change. There are two types of weathering, and they are mechanical and chemical. Mechanical weathering is the type of weathering in which rocks and minerals break down into smaller pieces. The key thing here is that mechanical weathering does not change the composition of the rock. It only is going to break the rock down into smaller pieces. You also know this as physical weathering. And the two factors that contribute to mechanical weathering are temperature and pressure. The effect of temperature on rocks is the following. Water that has collected in the cracks of the rocks and rock layers will freeze when the temperature drops below the freezing point. So what we're talking about here is in climates where it gets cold enough for water to freeze, water is able to get into the cracks of rocks. It gets into the cracks of rocks no matter where you're at in the world. But in the cooler climates, that water is going to freeze, and as it freezes, water expands, and that is going to widen the cracks in the rock, okay? And then when the temperature goes back up, then the ice is going to melt in the cracks of the rocks, in rock layers. And then, of course, refreezes, and then the crack widens even more than it was before. This is known as frost wedging. The definition for frost wedging is the freeze, thaw cycles of water in the cracks of rocks. And this is why we see potholes in the wintertime. So this is why those early days of spring, you've noticed the roads are super, super bad and awful. It's because throughout the winter, this frost wedging has been occurring, and that creates potholes. The effect of pressure. This is the other thing that can contribute to the mechanical weathering of rock. There are two scales we can look at. We can look at the small scale. We can also look at large scale. So we have the small scale picture here in this picture. So on a small scale, we have plant or tree roots, like in this picture. They get wedged in the cracks of rocks, in rock layers. Let's just say they get wedged in the cracks of rocks. And while doing that, they exert pressure as they grow and expand. So this can cause rocks to split. We have, like I mentioned, a beautiful example here of this plant and its roots and how the roots are cutting through the rock and causing it to split. This also can happen on a larger scale when top rock layers are removed by processes such as erosion, so that means the top rock layer is being carried off someplace else, or mining. That is going to decrease the pressure on the bedrock. And that decreased pressure causes the bedrock surface to expand in long curved cracks to form. We have a picture of this on the next slide. So what I described on the last slide is called exfoliation. This is a mechanical weathering process in which the outer rock layers are stripped away, often resulting in dome-shaped formations. So this is going to happen because fine cracks develop after uplift. So uplift is when the bedrock has less pressure on it, and so it's able to, it expands because of that. And so then we see cracks developing, and it creates these dome shapes. This picture you can find in your textbook, and it is Half Dome, and you can find it here at this national park. But it was created through this process. Okay. Chemical weathering is going to be the process by which rocks and minerals undergo changes in their composition. So this means that their chemical makeup changes, which also means that it becomes a different type of material. Okay? The agents of chemical weathering we're going to discuss are water, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and acid precipitation. Rock composition is going to be really important when it comes to chemical weathering because it determines the effect that chemical weathering will have. Example that I have is limestone and marble. They are made of a mineral called calcite, which can decompose completely in acidic water. Okay, so these rocks are going to be more susceptible to chemical weathering, rocks with calcite, okay, like limestone and marble. This picture is of a statue that has been chemically weathered by acidic water and also atmospheric pollutions, which is why I included it here on the slide. Temperature also has an effect on chemical weathering because it influences the rate at which the chemical reactions can occur. What happens is that reactions are going to increase as temperature increase. And what we actually see is that the rate of chemical weathering doubles with each 10 degrees Celsius increase in the temperature. Water is an important agent in chemical weathering because it can dissolve many kinds of minerals in rocks. Water is going to serve also as a medium where chemical reactions can take place. And water can also react directly with minerals in a chemical reaction. The example I have of this is potassium feldspar being turned into kaolinite, and I probably didn't say that right. This happens through a hydrolysis reaction, which means hydrolysis means that water is involved. So water is going to dissolve the potassium, and that turns this feldspar into this clay material, kaolinite. Oxygen also can contribute to chemical weathering. Okay, oxidation is a type of chemical reaction of oxygen with other substances. Okay, our example here is how iron in rocks, in minerals, combine with oxygen to form the oxidized form of iron. And this is an example here of hematite formed through oxidation. Carbon dioxide also has a huge effect on chemical weathering because carbon dioxide combines with water to form carbonic acid. So carbonic acid is a weak acid. It's going to fall then as precipitation, and it can dissolve certain rocks like limestone. The other thing that happens is when it seeps into the ground, it becomes an even stronger acid, and it can react with the limestone and marble that is in the bedrock to dissolve rocks. This can lead to the formation of limestone caverns, picture here. And it also can lead to the development of sinkholes. And here is a sinkhole pictured here. Places in the US that have a lot of limestone in their bedrock are more susceptible to having sinkholes. So a state in the US that famously has a lot of sinkholes is Florida. Florida is like the sinkhole capital of the US, and that is because they have a lot of limestone as their bedrock that gets dissolved by the carbonic acid. Other states, sorry, I'm just going to write that it's a sinkhole capital. But other states that also see a lot of sinkhole formation due to its limestone is going to be Texas, Alabama, which I think is AL, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Pennsylvania, which I don't remember, so I will spell it out. So those states have a lot of limestone, and therefore you see more instances of sinkholes occurring there. There is actually a story a few years back of a man who was sleeping in his bed in Florida and wound up dying after his bed fell into a sinkhole in Florida. Acid precipitation, of course, as everyone knows, is going to have a huge effect also on chemical weathering. So acid precipitation is caused by gases, sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen oxides. These gases are going to combine with water. So these gases combine with water and oxygen in the atmosphere. And form very strong acids, strong sulfuric, nitric, and carbonic acids, which has a pH. They have a pH below 5.6, and usually these are released, not even usually, these are released into the atmosphere often by humans through human activity. And as this picture shows, they are harmful to organisms and forests. So this is a forest that has been devastated by acid precipitation. Okay. The rate of weathering is going to be determined by certain conditions that can either accelerate or slow the weathering process. Okay. So, for example, interactions between temperature and precipitation in a given climate is going to determine the rate of weathering. This is a pretty cool story. We have Cleopatra's Needle in New York and the pylon of Ramses in Egypt. And basically, both of these were carved from granite more than 1,000 years ago. And for more than 1,000 years, both stood in Egypt's dry climate. Okay? And looked, they weren't affected by the weather there. But in 1881, the Cleopatra's Needle was moved to New York, and you can see the drastic differences now between these two structures. Because the climate in New York is not hot and dry like the Egyptian climate, there's acid rain and also freezing and thawing that happens in New York that has contributed to the drastic weathering of Cleopatra's Needle. Both of these were carved from granite, by the way. Okay, so how does climate affect chemical weathering? We're going to see more chemical weathering in climates that have warm temperatures and a lot of rainfall and less vegetation. So why is that? That is because the water from, I should say why, water from, whoops, did not mean to go back. Water from heavy rainfalls combine with the carbon dioxide in soil and produces high levels of carbonic acids. So this type of weathering is going to be greatest along the equator. So places that are hot and also get a lot of rainfall and have very lush vegetation. Mechanical weathering, on the other hand, is going to be more rapid in cooler climates. This is highest in areas where water can be in cracks and freeze, okay, and undergo a repeated freezing and thawing cycle. Also, in cooler climates, we see less chemical weathering because the cool temperatures are going to slow or inhibit chemical weathering. So the thing to remember here is that cool temperatures slow chemical weathering. Remember, the effect of temperature on chemical weathering is that it doubles with every 10 degrees Celsius increase in the temperature. So of course, if you have a cooler climate, you're going to see less chemical weathering. Okay, this is a map showing you where we see the most chemical weathering, where we see the most basically where we see the most chemical weathering, where we see the least amount of chemical weathering. So in yellow here, these are the places on the globe where we see the most chemical weathering. And in the red areas, these are places where we see less chemical weathering. In all of the red, you can tell, is up north where it is a lot cooler. Okay, so not all the rocks in the same climate weather at the same rate. This is because rocks are made up of different things. So weathering is going to depend on the type of rock and the composition of that rock. So I've mentioned this before, but I'll mention it again as an example. Rocks that contain the mineral calcite, like limestone and marble, are more easily weathered than rocks containing mostly quartz, like granite and quartzite. Surface area is going to have another huge effect on how quickly things weather. Okay, so what we know from this presentation so far is that mechanical weathering is going to break things down into smaller pieces. I should say breaks rock down into smaller pieces. And as these pieces get smaller, their surface area is going to increase. So as pieces get smaller, surface area increases. This results in more total surface area for chemical weathering to do its work. So this is demonstrated by the smaller the pieces are, the more surface area you have. So this is demonstrated by this picture here. So with this rock that is whole, we have a surface area of 600 cubic centimeters. But with this rock that is broken down into pieces, we now have a surface area of 6,000 cubic, I said cubic, sorry, squared centimeters for both. Okay, so because of this, we have smaller pieces and weathering can act on it better. So weathering has a bigger effect on multiple smaller particles as opposed to a single large rock. This is similar to the way that you are told to chew your food before you swallow, because it is easier then for the chemicals in your body to break down your food that you just ate when it's in smaller pieces than if you just swallow your food whole. Rate of weathering is also going to be affected by topography, or the shape of the landscape. Okay. Basically, rocks on level surface are just going to stay where they're at. Meanwhile, we have rocks that are on slopes are more likely to move downhill due to gravity. So you'll see that steep slopes often have more erosion because of this. So erosion, once again, is a movement of weathered material from one place to another. Okay? It's not the breaking down of the material, it's the movement of the material. And you'll see that on slopes because of gravity pulling it down. So steep slopes promote erosion and continually expose more rocks to weathering. Okay. So what did we learn today? Today we learned about the different types of weathering, mechanical or physical weathering, and chemical weathering, and the different things that can change the rate of weathering. I hope you learned something and that you have a wonderful day, and be kind to one another.